The Great Depression wasn't just an economic downturn, it was a full-scale survival test for millions of people. Between 1929 and the early 1940s, families lost everything overnight. Jobs vanished, food became scarce, and desperation spread across the world. For modern people used to fast food, credit cards, and government safety nets, surviving the Great Depression would have been nearly impossible. In this video, we're diving into the brutal realities of this era. How did people find food? How did they keep their families alive? And why would most of us today struggle to make it through? Let's step back in time and find out. The crash that changed everything. It all started on October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday, when the stock market crashed, wiping out billions of dollars in wealth. What followed was the worst economic collapse in modern history. Banks failed, businesses closed, and unemployment skyrocketed. Unlike today, there were no reliable social safety nets. If you lost your job, there were no unemployment benefits to fall back on. If you lost your home, you were on your own. Within months, breadlines stretched for blocks, families crammed into makeshift shelters, and once thriving cities turned into landscapes of despair. The stock market crash didn't just hurt investors, it crippled everyday people. Farmers couldn't sell crops, factory workers were laid off in droves, and bank accounts were wiped out overnight. Without modern conveniences like credit cards, online banking, or government stimulus programs, survival meant scraping by however you could. People today are used to food delivery, medical insurance, and stable incomes. But in the Great Depression, even affording a meal was a daily struggle. Could you have survived in a world where work was scarce, money was meaningless, and hope was in short supply? No money, no food, no hope. Food wasn't just scarce during the Great Depression, it was nearly impossible to afford. Grocery stores were stocked, but most families couldn't buy anything. The lucky ones grew their own food, but many in cities had no land for farming. Desperate families turned to breadlines and soup kitchens, where people waited for hours just to get a meal. Others resorted to scavenging, eating things like dandelion greens, boiled rats, or even roadkill, just to survive. Mock apple pie, made from crackers and vinegar, became a staple. People stretched what little they had. Meat was a luxury, and every scrap of food was rationed. Today, food is everywhere. Grocery stores, restaurants, food delivery apps. If you're hungry, you can order a meal in minutes. But during the Great Depression, people often had to choose between eating and paying rent. Imagine surviving without a fridge, modern preservatives, or even access to clean drinking water. People had to be resourceful, but no matter how hard they tried, hunger was a daily reality. Could you make it in a world where food security didn't exist, and every meal was a struggle to find? Homelessness and makeshift living. Losing your home today is devastating, but during the Great Depression, it was an everyday reality. Millions of people were evicted when they couldn't pay rent or mortgages. Entire families packed their belongings into old cars, travelling from town to town, searching for work. Those with nowhere to go ended up in Hoovervilles, makeshift shantytowns built from scrap metal, wood, and whatever materials people could find. These slums popped up in cities across America, named sarcastically after President Herbert Hoover, who many blamed for the crisis. Life in Hoovervilles was harsh. No running water, no proper sanitation, and disease ran rampant. Even those who still had homes struggled. Many couldn't afford electricity or heating. Families crammed into one room, sleeping under piles of newspapers or old clothes for warmth. To save on costs, some people took in boarders, renting out spare rooms, or even living in their basements while strangers occupied the main house. Could you handle life without a safe, warm place to sleep? No modern plumbing, no security, no privacy? The homeless of the Great Depression had no choice. For them, survival meant improvising, because the alternative was freezing, starving, or worse. Desperate for work, finding a job in the Great Depression was like winning the lottery, nearly impossible. At its peak, unemployment reached 25%, meaning 1 in 4 people had no way to earn a living. And those who did find work faced brutal conditions for pitiful wages. Factories laid off workers in droves, construction projects halted, and even skilled labourers found themselves begging for any job. Some men travelled across the country looking for farm work, while women took whatever sewing or cleaning jobs they could find. Many children had to drop out of school to help support their families. If you were lucky enough to get a job, it didn't mean stability. Wages were slashed, and employers held all the power. People worked grueling hours for pennies, just grateful to have anything. Strikes and protests were common, but with so many desperate for work, employers could replace workers in an instant. Today, if you lose your job, there are job listings, networking, and government assistance. But in the Great Depression, losing your job often meant losing everything. Could you endure a world where every morning was a battle to find work, where desperation forced people to accept any job, no matter how dangerous or degrading? The emotional toll. Surviving the Great Depression wasn't just a physical struggle, it was a mental battle. People lost everything overnight: their homes, savings, and sense of security. For many, the weight of despair was too much to bear. Men, once proud providers, found themselves unable to support their families. Some abandoned their homes out of shame, becoming hobos who travelled the country searching for work. Others simply gave up. Women bore immense burdens, stretching every dollar, sewing clothes from old fabric, and making meals out of nearly nothing. Mothers skipped meals so their children could eat. Entire families lived under constant stress, unsure of what the next day would bring. Despite the hardship, many found strength in their communities. Neighbours helped each other, people shared food, and makeshift support networks formed. But the psychological scars never fully healed. Even decades later, those who lived through the Depression were forever shaped by its lessons of resilience, thrift, and survival. For modern people used to comfort and stability, the Depression's mental toll would be crushing. Could you stay strong in a world where every day was filled with fear, hunger, and uncertainty? The Great Depression was more than just an economic crisis. It was a test of human endurance. Millions of people faced hunger, homelessness, and desperation, fighting for survival in ways many of us can't even imagine today. Without modern safety nets, job security, or reliable food sources, life was an unrelenting challenge. Could you have survived it? Would you have been able to endure starvation, extreme poverty, and the constant uncertainty of tomorrow? It's easy to assume we could manage, but the reality was far harsher than most people realise. The lessons of the Great Depression still resonate today. It was a time of immense hardship, but also of resilience and determination. People adapted, fought, and found ways to keep going, even when the odds were stacked against them. If you found this deep dive into history fascinating, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. What part of the Great Depression shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from history's toughest times. You won't want to miss what's coming next.